Hello, everybody. I see the room is getting full of people who have been waiting for this event. I know I personally have been waiting for this event because it's always a pleasure to chat with Allie. So yeah, I'm excited that we're doing this again. I know like our initial vision for this was to do it more than once, so I'm really excited that we're back. Okay, lots of people coming into the room right now. Please let us know in the chat. I always love to see what your mission is. Drop like the name of your organization, drop your mission. I think sometimes the best, like most fun part of these things for me sometimes is to see kind of the impact, the collective impact that we're having and the different things that we're all working on because I'm learning so much from everybody all the time. But I know we have so many questions to get to today. So without further ado, I do want to hop in. I am going to go ahead and introduce our guest right now. I will say that I did go through everyone's questions. So everyone that registered, I have read your question. I sorted it. I sent it to Allie. We went through and we talked about what ones we thought kind of maybe represented the most missions or maybe the most issues or maybe especially things that are occurring right now in real time. So I do also want to say drop your questions in the chat as they come up, especially if you're looking for clarification on something that we're discussing. So yeah, let me kick off by introducing our very special guest, which is Allie Levene. This is our second time doing this, so maybe you already know her, but Allie Levene is an attorney and she's the founder of Levene Legal. And they specialize in providing affordable and accessible legal services to small businesses and nonprofits. Before founding Levene Legal, Allie served as in-house and outside counsel for a number of Connecticut businesses, and in those roles, she represented clients in litigation and administrative proceedings as they related to employment, civil rights, and general liability. So I know that most of the questions that we got are related to those things. So I'm really excited that people submitted those. Allie also was a panelist at our September Narratives with Integrity panel. So if you caught that, again, you might recognize her. And basically, when we did that panel, so many people had questions for Allie that we decided we needed this to be its own event. So that's what we're doing. But before we get started, I want to just do a few logistics with you all today. So this is going to be a 60-minute session. It's Ask Me Anything style. So today's topic is nonprofit legal questions. So again, if you have new questions, drop them in the chat. If you're looking for clarification, please let us know and we will talk about it. I know you're probably going to ask. Yes, we are recording and you will receive a copy via email after the event. And then if you have any questions, not legal questions, if you don't ask me those, but if you have any legal questions about memory fox or about ethical storytelling, which is kind of my topic that I like to talk about, I'd love to connect with you afterwards. So keep that in mind. And little shameless plug here at the top of the hour, we are doing a really fun promotion for Memory Fox. So Memory Fox is a tool for nonprofits to collect, organize, and share impact stories. Right now, in preparation for March Madness, Ellie, I don't know if you're a basketball fan, but I'm a huge March Madness fan.
I'm a UConn Husky fan, so
Oh, of
yeah,
course you are. Okay.
that's where I went to school and big fan. Yep.
Of course you are. I should have known that. Oh my gosh, of course. So we're doing a big March Madness promo right now. We're looking for 64 nonprofits to sign up to be a part of our March Madness event. And how it's going to work is you'll meet with our team and then you will be matched with somebody, a team that is part of March Madness. And what we're going to do is if your team makes it to the Final Four, you will win a free Memory Fox account. So it's a really cool promo. I'm really excited about it. It's going to make it even more fun to watch the games. But I wanted to tell you about it now because we are only down to 11 slots left to fill out our 64 bracket. So if anybody here is interested, go ahead and scan that QR code or I'll drop the link in the chat. I'd love to have you be a part of it. You do need to be a nonprofit to be eligible, and you cannot be currently a Memory Fox storyteller to be eligible. And there's some other rules and eligibility you can check out. But okay, I wanted to get that out of the way.
Somebody said go Gamecocks, South Carolina in the chat.
I'll have to update you, Allie, on who gets UConn in the bracket, and then you can go ahead and cheer for them. That will be pretty cool. Wonderful. Okay, and now I just got to make sure I've got the chat where I can see it. Oh, lovely. Okay, I am all set up. Allie, are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so many great questions. I know I've already said that, but really, I'm always blown away by this. So let's start with here was a question that came in from our friend Emma. This is kind of about current events. It's related to current events. It's actually about the language use. So I'm going to read the question and then I'll drop it in the chat for everybody. So the question is, how do we balance maintaining our brand voice and advocating for our LGBTQIA+ and BIPOC clients while minimizing risk of government intervention loss of federal funding, as the current administration has made it clear these terms are unacceptable on government websites? We want to make sure our marginalized neighbors know we are here for them, but we also need to be able to fund our programs in order to continue serving them. Vague wording feels safer, but disingenuous and performative while our clients need us most. This is obviously a huge question, so very interested to see your input here, Allie.
So I wish I could come with better news and say, here's the exact answer. But the reality is that we all know, everyone on this, we're living in uncertain times right now. And a lot of that stems from these confusing executive orders that we've seen. And they're confusing mainly because the wording is so vague. They're referencing things like DEI or saying that funding needs to align with the administration's goals and policies, but it doesn't define anything. And even though these executive orders were put into place very early on in the new administration, we still don't have guidance. So the first thing that every organization should be doing, whether they have federal funding or they were thinking about getting some sort of federal funding, is identify the specific agency that the funding is coming from. And the reason why
That's a really good point. I love that.
the reason why that is so important is because the executive orders largely are telling the agencies to define what these mean. They're giving the agencies the authority to say that. And so unfortunately, that does mean we're in a bit of a waiting game, and I'll tell you what to do while we're in that waiting game. But I want to describe what we're waiting for. We're waiting for these agencies to put out their own guidance. And I think it was last week or the week before that there was a leaked memo from the National Science Foundation, and it was this list of banned words for grants. And it was really scary. So the first thing I say is, right, we don't know, it's a leaked memo. We don't yet know what role it's going to play. But the other piece and why it's so important to wait for each agency is other agencies may take a different approach. They may have different. So we really need to see. And if you have multiple agencies, right, it could be different for different programs. So what do you do in the meantime? This is where risk management really comes into play and your organization's level of risk tolerance. So I've worked with plenty of organizations on this, and there's two ways that they've kind of fallen, and it really depends on their risk tolerance. One is say, we're going to back off from DEI programs right now. And those tend to be the organizations that their mission isn't necessarily directly tied with DEI. So, you know, an after school program for kids, right? They said, we're just going to take away our DEI committee for now, right? For now, while we wait. But organizations whose mission really revolves around DEI, like the question posed with LGBTQ and things like that, a lot of them have made the decision, we're not going to do that. And one of the big reasons that needs to be considered is if you remove that stuff, if you change your language, could you be jeopardizing your non-federal funding sources? So your state contracts, are there requirements in there that you need to keep that, right?
Right.
Yep. Or private grants, foundations. So you need to be looking at that. And so ultimately, each organization is going to have to do this risk analysis and say, for us, what's on the line. But something else that's really important is because of the risks, make sure you involve your board. A lot of time these are kept at, the level of management, executive director, CEO. But given what's going on, your board should be involved or kept up to date so that they know what's going on. So definitely take this to your board.
Oh, that is so true. I completely agree. Gosh, yeah, going through the process of changing your language on your website. I mean, that is a huge process. So I really feel for you if that is something that our audience feels like they are needing to do or are currently doing. That has got to be very overwhelming. So I just want to say I feel for you on that. Yeah, I think you've made such a good point that there might be other funding streams that are hinging on those things. I mean, I know I certainly have written grants before for corporate sponsors that include what your commitment is to DEI, and you have to put, you put that on there. When you put that out there, that's a commitment that you've made. So yeah, you're right. That is all down to risk management.
Yeah.
Big time.
Another big one is a lot of states in their contracts, they have affirmative action plan requirements.
Right.
So look at that aspect. You might not be able to actually get rid of it, even if you want to be safe for now. So you have to look at all of that stuff in your current funding sources and future ones to know what it is.
Wow. Okay. Kicked it off with a really, really deep question, didn't we? Maybe I should have waited a little bit on that one, but I think it's super important. So top of the hour was important. Okay, well, I'm sure what we talk about next, this will continue to come up, but let's talk a little bit about data. So, you hear about AI all the time. People are always wondering, what should I put in? How is this going to affect my data? What is this going to do for confidentiality? Things like that. A question from Elisa. She said, what data protection laws apply to the way we collect and store donor information?
So this is such a pertinent question, not just with AI, but with how donor management has really evolved over the recent, right? We are relying a lot more on technology to do these things, whether it be the outreach or keeping track and having our databases. And we hear about a new data breach every day, right?
Oh, yes, we definitely do.
And aside from data breaches, there's even just within your organization, not using it properly or giving it out to someone. So what are the laws? Unfortunately, it's not a simple answer to say, hey, here's this statute, here's what you go do. But I'm going to give you the framework so that at least you can navigate this with your organization and where to start, as well as some free resources. So I always want to try and point out some free resources. So if I can do that in this one, I've got a few. So we've got laws at the federal level and at the state level. So federal level, the primary one is called the Federal Trade Commission Act. And this is what the FTC, they do, and it says you can't do deceptive or unfair practices related to data security or privacy. It's pretty vague, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of hard because it's written in a way that it allows them to kind of adapt to the times and what may constitute being unfair or deceptive. But things that have been found to be violations are not taking reasonable security measures to protect your data, right?
Oh, yes.
So
Okay.
do you have proper firewalls? Do you have proper password protection? Those things, those are all things to be in place. The other is disclosing donor information without consent.
Mm,
They've given you their information solely for the purpose of donating. Unless
right.
you have their written consent to also, share it with, whether you want to share it with another organization, whoever it is, you can't do that. That's the bottom line. So how do you figure out what else you really can't do and how to shape those? So the FTC actually has some really good resources on their website. So ftc.gov is their website.
I'll find it.
You'll go on there and it'll show advice and guidance and it breaks it down in subject. And so start there, read that guidance, see what it says, but also work with your IT teams then to be able to implement that. So then we have the state level. This is where it gets a little more complicated because a lot of states have enacted their own laws around this. And of course, they're not the same. They are different as to what entities they apply to. Some do exempt nonprofits, so that is helpful. But they also have different, even if you have to abide by it, there's different requirements what you have to do. So what you need to do is you need to do two things. First, you have to look up the law in the state or states you operate, because that will apply, but also anywhere you have a donor. If a donor is in another state, you need to look up that state's law because you
Wow.
have to comply with that because they're a resident of that state. So how do you go about figuring all this? So here's the two free resources for this. One of the most underutilized resources for any business is the free resources your insurance carrier provides. Yep.
Oh.
So, like I know, I'm gonna give you an example. So under my policy for my insurance with the Hartford, I get a 1 hour free complimentary consultation with a cybersecurity professional. Others offer other sorts of resources. So start there. Find out if your carrier most offers something, right? So take advantage of these free resources. The other one is this is the website for the International Association of Privacy Professionals, so IAPP.org. And what they have is they have charts and reports about each state that has a law and their requirements. And they do a good job of keeping things up to date because there's also certain states that are in the process of enacting law. So they have a really good overview. And so what this allows you to do is get started so you have a better idea. And it may even answer your question fully. You may be in a state that there is no requirements, right? But these are great starting points to answer these questions about how you protect donor data and just your data in general as a nonprofit, whether it's participant, just financial information,
Right.
all that. How do you protect it?
Wow. Okay. Yes, this is so interesting. So, that's got me thinking the way you had said, like sharing data unless they, or any type of information unless they know about it, of course, is not something you should do. But I'm even thinking about, like when we list people in an annual report, or we say maybe shout out people on social media, like this group of sponsors. I guess maybe sponsors, you
So
say you'll be
yeah, and
shouting them
and
out.
recognizing a donor, that's fine, but you're not
Okay,
posting their address. But like, right, how many you have at your gala? This is our sponsors, right?
right.
Yeah. But what we're talking about, so AI is actually the perfect example. Let's use that. So AI, this is putting things in simple terms, and I am not a
Mhm.
tech person, but you have closed AI and open AI, right?
Right.
Open AI, so ChatGPT, what I put in there, they can use anywhere. So
Yes.
you should not be putting donor information
Oh, like
in
let's
there.
not download our full donor list, put it into ChatGPT because then we now know where all those people live.
Right. Or even if you're saying, I need help rewriting this email, what I do is I put a fake name, John Doe,
Yeah.
just because you don't want, right? You don't know what happens with that.
Right.
So things like that. Or things like, right, sharing between agencies or things like that. Like you need to have consent. If you're not using it for your internal purposes and there's a risk that it could fall into the wrong hands or be used someplace else. Um, and that's not just even legal, like the ethical, right?
Mhm.
We have an ethical, and this is what I love about Memory Fox. It's really championing not just the legal, but the ethical requirements.
Mhm.
You have to be good stewards of your donors because without them, obviously you need them, but you need to protect them the same way you're protecting participants in organizations. And so this helps you do that.
Yes. Wow. Okay. I'm really glad we asked that question because that really got me thinking. And that actually reminds me, I hope you don't mind. I went out of order because now I'm thinking that this makes sense with another question that was brought up.
Let's
I
do it.
actually also by Elisa. I'm not sure if it's the same Elisa, might not be, might be. But the question is, do we need to register for charitable solicitation in multiple states if we receive donations online?
Maybe. So this is an it depends because so much of what we talk about is governed by state law, and our states have very different things. And this is one area, charitable solicitation, it's governed by state law, and different states have different rules. So here's an example. I'm in Connecticut, and the rule here is, let's say your organization is outside of Connecticut, and you get a donation from somebody in Connecticut. Let's say I donate to your organization. I find
Okay.
her organization. I Google search. I'm looking for something to save the whales, and I find hers. There's a donate button. I click it. I found that website on my own. I used your button. You don't have to register. But if Carly's organization reaches out to me directly and I
Oh,
don't just happen to find them, they have to register in Connecticut. Um,
whoa.
so that's Connecticut's rule. Texas is another example. Only certain organizations have to register. Then you have the other, Delaware, there's no registration requirements. So this is just to show you it,
Don't you just love that, how it's
right,
different in all 50 states?
it varies. And I try to look for, similar to like the free resources, like somebody who lists the different states. I have not found one yet. If I find one, we can definitely get that out to people in an email. So if I
Right.
come across that, I'm going to continue to look. I have not found one at least that's up to date. So
And
yeah,
you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, so, before I came to work at Memory Fox, I used to work at nonprofits. And one of the nonprofits I worked at was a national organization. We helped veterans that were in crisis across the nation. So we did solicit donations across the nation. And that includes corporate sponsors from across the nation. And I do remember we did have a lot of these for every single state. We
yep.
did have to file, and now I'm remembering, or for most of the states, I remember that being a part of my colleague's job, like, oh, I've got to work on the state solicitation,
Right.
whatever
It's
they're
part of
called. But
your compliance. Yeah.
yes, oh my gosh,
And it's
I'm
also one of
making
those things
connections.
that it's like sometimes you may, because again, laws can be vague and you're like, maybe it doesn't. It might be one of those better safe than sorry, right? I have a lot of organizations that do say that, or they're like, it's not clear, and they choose to register.
Right.
But you're going to have to look at each state where you have a donor to see if you also need to register there.
Okay, so let's stick with licenses and then legal documents. This next question comes from Douglas. Douglas asked, how can a nonprofit work with a university to develop part of their program, then license out the resulting product to help support the nonprofit's program?
Okay.
That's a couple facets going on there on that question.
So we're going to divide it into two, just like Doug,
Okay.
he teed us up perfectly. So I appreciate that. And I have to say, like Carly said, we went through all the questions and I just love how well written they are. Like it's clear and like the
I know,
example.
I didn't change these. These are
Yeah.
exactly what you all
So
wrote.
it's, it's panelist dream. Okay. So we'll start with the first part. How can you collaborate with a university or any other entity, right? This is, we're using the university example for an art program or whatever it is, but it can be anything. How do you do that? The first thing and the number one thing you need, the key to any partnership, is you have to have a clear contract in place.
Okay.
So what I refer to these as is a partner organization agreement, but the name doesn't matter, right? It's what's inside of it that does. So let's talk about what goes in there. So at a minimum, you need to be defining the roles and responsibilities of each party, right? What's the nonprofit doing? What is the university doing? Who's responsible for what? Right? What are deadlines, right? You have to put the expectations in there. Next is financial obligations. There's going to be costs. Who is responsible for what costs, right? The goal of this is to save disagreements down the line, issues. Maybe there's never a problem. Great. But we've all been around long enough to know it doesn't always work like that. So what you're doing is you are accounting for that and minimizing your risks should something go wrong. And the last thing, and probably the most important thing based on this question, is intellectual property rights.
Ooh.
Right? Who owns that program? Who has the right to distribute, to sell it, to license it? That needs to be in there. So now let's talk about the second part. How do you actually go and license it? And once again, you need a very clear contract. You need to have a license agreement with whoever you're doing it for. But it's very important that you actually have the rights to license it, like I said. So you can't license it if your agreement with the partner doesn't give you that ability. So it either doesn't give you all of the rights to the program or at least the ability to license it. So you need to make sure that's in there. Once you've done that, you need to have a license agreement with whoever you're licensing it to. And similar, what are roles and responsibilities, finances? And the most important thing of any license agreement is what can they do and what can they not do with your materials and programs. I'll do two common examples I see. You partner, you have this program, whether it's like, say it's a 2-day in-person event and you train their facilitators to do it. Can they market your program? Can they use your logo? Can they use your imagery?
Right.
A lot of times you do want them to, but you need to, what are the restrictions? Do they have to run everything by you and be pre-approved? Are there preset guidelines? So that's an example, and that should go in there. The other big one I see is copying materials. Do you want them to be able to replicate your materials?
Right.
If you're okay with that, probably not, right? So limits, like you can only replicate it for your employees, like things like that. So just licensing it isn't enough. You get to control what you're actually licensing, and that goes into that agreement.
Wow. I Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's so interesting. That makes so much sense. I think a lot about, well, kind of what you were just getting at. Like, I think about how sometimes you get into a partnership with somebody and then they maybe want to like, they use like your old logo or something and that wasn't the one, because you didn't talk about it ahead of time. This is the logo I need you to use for this or something. And you're like, and I just,
You've worked so hard on this branding, and it's so
mhm.
important and such an asset. You need to make sure it's being used correctly.
Yes, exactly. Wow. Okay. Great question from Douglas. Wonderful. Um, I'm so glad we talked about that. All right. Let's see. What do we have next? How about this question came from Deborah. She said, is a nonprofit allowed to sell items or merchandise, or does a separate friends organization need to be created? Okay, I have personally thought about this question a lot when I used to work at nonprofits. What is the deal here? How do we even do something like this?
So, can nonprofits sell merchandise? The answer is yes, but.
Yes, but.
Yes, but. So yes, you can, but there's a but. Yes, you can sell merchandise, but you may be subjecting your organization to income tax. So
Ooh, right.
there's a common misconception, and not one that I think I blame people for, because it's right where we hear tax exempt, all this. It's the purpose of what we do. Nonprofits are subject to something called unrelated business income tax.
Okay.
UBIT. I'm just going to call it the tax for what we're doing.
Okay.
But if you want to look more into it, UBIT. And this is a federal tax. And so you can sell merchandise. It will be exempt from income tax, but it has to be sold directly in furtherance of your mission. And I'm going to give an example to explain this, because
Okay.
directly in furtherance of your mission, not just to raise funds. So the sole purpose cannot be to raise funds. It actually has to further your mission. So here's the example. And this is
Ooh.
an example of a case that the IRS decided. And so it's kind of like the shining example in this area, because they've blessed it. Art museum. They have their gift shop.
Mm-hmm.
They sell greeting cards. And on the front of the greeting cards is a reproduction of art
Right.
that they've either showcased. The IRS says this is not subject to the tax. Why? Because the purpose of the museum is to raise public awareness, interest, and appreciation of art. So those cards do that. But they were also selling like science things or things that were
Right.
needed just to make those, they were subject to tax because it
Right. Because
wasn't
sometimes you see
furthering the
like
mission.
toys or something that are,
Right.
or a board game or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Or candy, right? If it's not furthering the mission directly, then you can't.
Ooh.
But there's another but. It isn't just because it's unrelated. So even if, let's say, and I think a good example, a simple one is you want to sell shirts with your nonprofit's logo.
Yes.
You want
Yes.
to do a small fundraiser,
Shirts,
like,
sweatshirts, some sort of swag that you
right?
might want to sell so people can represent your brand.
Exactly. So the sole purpose of that would be generating funds.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as you are not doing it regularly, it's not subject to the tax. Now, of
Oh,
course, there's the definition of regularly, but if you are doing like a one-time thing or you do it occasionally, then you don't have to pay the taxes on that. So
okay.
here's what I say for everyone. If you are going to be selling any sort of merchandise, you need to get together with your accounting team,
Mm.
because you'll be able to work with them to figure out, is this something that would likely subject us to income tax? Because if it doesn't mean you can't do it, but now you need to account for that in the financials or in your pricing of things to offset what that would
Okay.
be.
So let me ask you this.
Yep.
So where does this distinction come? Does it come from, for example, what if all of my t-shirts are donated and the person who designed them, the person who is printing them for me, no cost? Or does it come on the, is that where that would come into play? Would that be considered more like a gift, or does that, how
And
would
this is where there are so many exceptions and things like that. For example, there's real estate exceptions. There's exceptions that are specific based on donated goods. So
right.
so this is again, why no matter what, if you're selling something, I say talk with the accounting team, because there are also so many more specific exceptions based on facts and circumstances. But when you said that example too, like, another example that would probably be exempt from the tax, you have a program where you provide workforce training to individuals, adults with
Hmm.
disabilities, and they are making the shirts as part of their job. Now,
Oh, yeah.
selling that, right? So you see that's the relation.
Mhm.
So without going into there is, I think, the
Right.
IRS pamphlet on it is 84 pages, I think, or something like that. And it does actually,
Just a quick read, just an everyday little
it's
read.
actually really good though, because it does give a lot of concrete examples, which is
Oh,
helpful.
good.
But like a lot of things, it's very specific to the facts and circumstances of your organization. So what I want you to take away from this is you can do it, but you got to have those conversations with your accounting
Okay.
team before you do, to understand if there will be a tax. And again, even if there is a tax, you might still be able to do it. You just need to, account for that in
Right.
what the organization is going to have to pay.
So Susie in the chat is wondering, so an online store is maybe not encouraged if you don't want to pay that tax? Because a store would be ongoing, perhaps?
Right, that would be like ongoing. Now, let's say you were doing like, we see this a lot with schools.
Yeah.
They do like one-time things.
Yeah, or like 2-week long online store,
Right.
something like
So
that.
so that could be okay. So it really depends on that. But again, it's so fact specific
Mm-hmm.
that it really is, you need to be, no matter what, like checking with your accounting team. And it doesn't mean it's gonna be, they could be, yes, we at least know the facts. But there are also so many exceptions that making sure, okay, we've done it. No, we actually do qualify for this exemption.
And then Christina is wondering similarly, is it maybe come down to wording? Like what if the wording is that you're just having a suggested donation of this amount would qualify you for a free t-shirt or
Yeah.
something along those lines? Or is that
So
too weird?
no, I don't think it's too weird, but I don't know that it would make a distinction because
Okay.
it's a donation anyways, right? Because that person, you're still, they could still be donating and you're still asking for money. It's just changing the
Mhm.
wording. And really what the IRS is concerned about is that competition with a for-profits, right?
Right.
As a nonprofit, you're given the ability to avoid taxes for your mission. They don't want that being misused to now compete because you can do
Right.
it cheaper than another. So wording, and especially so with the IRS, they don't tend to care too much about wording. They look at like what the
Okay.
actual is. So I can't answer definitively, but it may be, and it's again one of those things to look at the specific things, but especially especially now, right? Wording, we've seen it means something different to every person.
Right.
So I wouldn't make your decision just based on wording. It's really
Okay.
what is the essence of it. And so if that's
So your intent, if they would take your intent into
right,
play.
they look at all the facts and circumstances, not just what you're calling it. They'll look at what do they
Interesting.
think it really is.
I never knew that. And at my last position, we would often talk about, well, we should have a store, but people love our brand. People, they want to wear our brand. They're looking for opportunities to do it. And yeah, I never really even thought that there would maybe be a tax implication to that. So I'm really glad that that question was asked. So
Yeah, and that's why
Deborah,
but I loved seeing that one because I think it is one of the most unknown things that I've encountered
definitely.
in my work.
And then of course, especially since we're taking, we're swiping stuff, right? So you're gonna see all the transactions, you're gonna see them all. It's not,
Right, and
maybe you're not just selling t-shirts on the street or something.
you'd rather be disclose it on your 990, right, than
Yeah,
have it be found out after and then have penalties related to that.
definitely.
Because the other thing too, and I didn't mention this, is doing it that way, and not saying people do it on purpose, but you could actually lose your tax exempt status if you don't
Right.
report this type of tax and pay it.
Yeah. And yeah, that's one of those examples where we've talked about this before more broadly, but nonprofits are held to such a high standard of like legality, but ethically as well. And if something comes out and you lose your status or you get people saying, "Oh, well, they just didn't want to pay this tax that they had to pay." I mean, that's like brand suicide, really. Like people don't want to be associated with your nonprofit. And there's a much higher standard for a nonprofit brand than a for-profit brand,
So you
unfortunately.
stole my answer to one of the next questions. I think like
Okay.
verbatim. So we'll touch on that there, but that's really one of the themes. And so when we talk about what can you do with all this uncertainty, we'll touch on that. So
Okay. Let me see. We could skip ahead to that one. Let me see here.
yeah,
Where am I seeing that one? Um, from Tessa. The question was, what can we do to best prepare when it seems like every day there's a more unprecedented bad news/new policy that's negatively impacting nonprofits? Is that the question you're referring to?
yep, that's the
Okay.
one. All right. So before I get to the piece about the high standards, I want to touch on something else first.
Okay.
So if you've listened to me before, if you've followed my LinkedIn, if you've been to any of these, I am a huge proponent of proactive risk management.
Yes.
And I strongly believe that nonprofits are not given enough resources to do it, to know how to do it. And so that is the first thing, is proactive risk management. It's essential. And that's because too often organizations are caught off guard. And not because they want to be right, because there are so many other things and there's so many things to deal with. And I do want to say this, it's never too late to start risk management. I'm working with a lot of organizations right now. They're starting, and any time is a good time to start, right? It's making that first step. So I want to give an example to kind of explain what this process looked like and how, by being proactive about it, this organization was able to better navigate this uncertainty. So this specific organization has a lot of participants that are immigrants, and they hold events. And so one of the risks that they've identified over the years, even before what's going on, is the risk that certain participants may not show up because of their immigration status. They might be fearful, even when we have police presence or things like that. So they've identified that risk. So when ICE enforcement actions and the officers started coming around and increased, they were able, it was already on their radar, they were able to quickly move into gear. And what I want to stress is risk management is not about predicting every possible scenario. They didn't sit there and say, ICE actions are going to increase. They just knew there was a risk that people might not come. What it's about is putting together a framework. So they were able to quickly, they said, we knew this was a risk. Here's resources we go to, right? So there's another organization in this community that works with immigrants. That's what they do, providing free legal advice. So they were able to reach out to them and get training from them on the subject, right? So they were better able to put together their plan because they had thought about it before. It's that little extra head start that really makes the difference between, being able to do it and scrambling. We're never going to be able to predict everything. And that is more true now than ever. But you can identify those general risks, right? Here's another one, and this isn't necessarily related to what's going on. On the state level, a lot of states are enacting stronger employee protection laws.
Oh, yeah.
It usually means that it's going to cost a little more money for things like more PTO, things like that. That should be, if you've got employees, that should be one of your risks, that our costs of having employees is going to increase. So that way you have things in place to be able, okay, this is happening. We've talked about this. So and I wish this wasn't, but we're all in this, right? Where we are going to have to be agile. We're going to have to constantly be adapting, but we just need to have the framework so we know who's in charge of that, who's going to handle that. And so here's the part where, tying into that last question, this is what every organization should be doing. Ensure that you are fully compliant with existing legal requirements. Nonprofits are held to a higher standard than other businesses. It's the nature of getting tax exemption. It's the things we've already talked about. Unrelated business income. We're going to talk also too about lobbying, political activity, right? Having to spend your money for your purpose, your board requirements. Like I just saw somebody ask a question about your bylaws, right? All these things. And the light is being shown on this stuff even more, right? There's increased scrutiny. So do not give anyone a reason to pull your status, to question what you're doing. And the way to do that is look over your current legal compliance, talking not just state laws, federal laws, and making any changes now, right? That's how to best protect your assets, your organization, your participants, your employees, and things like that. That's a proactive step that you can be doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, knowledge is power, right? I mean, we want to maybe hope that some of these things might just kind of go away or solve themselves, but really the only thing we can do is try to minimize those risks by knowing them in the future and preparing for them.
Right. And so I always say this all the time, but if you are really new to risk management, I did do a nice little blog.
Oh yeah, let me find it. I'll drop it in
outlining
the
the
chat.
steps, and I think it's just a great way to get started for organizations that are new to this, because it's not something that is talked about a lot or taught. And you Google it and you find these enterprise risk management for these large companies. It doesn't need to be that. You don't need to start with that. Excel spreadsheet. Start with an Excel spreadsheet. That's where you start.
Here is the blog post. Yeah, because honestly, like this was not something that I had previously considered. I hadn't been through an exercise thinking about risk management in my positions prior. So I think that's great advice and a great place to start.
Yeah. And actually, I think it ties in. So there was one question that remember seeing, and I don't think we were going to answer directly, but someone was like, do you recommend we start working with a lawyer now or later? And
Oh, yes,
yeah,
yes.
this is the perfect example, right? To get your compliance and your risk is you're doing proactive things. The legal world, being a lawyer, that's all it is. I'm managing risk because so much is unclear. It's changing. So my job is to work with clients and organizations and to help them navigate that risk by saying, here's what the law says. It hasn't applied to this situation. So everything it's all risk management. So it's just so important. And the other piece is too, risk management is the responsibility of everybody at your organization. No matter how small, it's everybody's responsibility. Same with compliance. It falls on
Mhm.
everybody.
I love that. So let's see. Here's a question from the chat. It's from Lauren. She said, can we please ask her? Oh, can you please ask her my question? I would love to. I'm going to do it right now. What if two organizations merge? Is it okay for the donors to be contacted or solicited by the new organization? Okay, so that's going back to our donor, the information sharing. The question wraps up with, do the donors have to be notified? Is this something that I should research by my state? And this is somebody from in California.
So California, and I'm sure the person asking this question is well aware, that tends to have the most rigorous and complex laws on every subject. So yes, depending by state, but here's what I say as, right, when we talk about the ethical thing, right,
Mhm.
is I would still get their consent. I would let them know, because especially how long ago did they donate? Maybe they don't. And so most likely you don't have a written thing. So I always think better safe than sorry.
Oh,
Um,
totally. I think it's a great way to re-engage too. Like, hey, we have a new look. We have new programs we're doing. We have a new mission, real, or maybe we're combining our missions. What are we doing? I think that's a great way. Say, hey, opt back in if you want to hear from us. This is, you know, if you want to give again or something like
Right. But this is definitely one of those ones you've got to look at the state because there may be distinctions based on, all right, are you merging? Are you having a completely new name? Is one taking
that.
over? So
Mhm.
there's so many different ways that mergers, consolidation can occur. And then you have the specific state laws that
Right.
may play into that. So that is one of those where you're going to have to look. And I know California probably has a very lengthy one.
All right. Here is a question from Sean. Sean asked, what legal obstacles would a founder of a nonprofit encounter if they would like to become paid staff of their nonprofit? Can they pay themselves with the revenue as long as they are not on the board?
So I'm going to combine this with it, make it an overall because
Okay.
this, what I'm going to say is because we also had some, what about board members compensating? So I'm going to give
Yes, yes,
general
we
advice
did.
on, we have founders, we have executive directors, we have board members, anyone with influence. So even like a chief operating officer, right? Anyone who has influence over the organization, whether they're on the board or not, you have to structure it so it doesn't become what the IRS calls an excess benefit transaction. One of these, yep. So this is another one that
That sounds scary. I don't like the name of
it's
that
scary,
one.
but we're gonna make it less scary. So what the IRS says is you have to pay when you're a nonprofit, you have to pay people a reasonable and not excessive amount. And when I say that, we're talking the full compensation package, right? So we're not just talking what their salary is, but their benefits, their
Right.
retirement. It all has to be reasonable, because otherwise you risk losing your tax exemption status. You have to pay taxes, and the individual could actually have to pay taxes themselves. Um,
Wow.
so
Okay.
how do you make sure that you're paying a reasonable salary? The IRS actually gives us three things that it says, if you do these, we will presume it is reasonable. What
Oh,
that means, right? So what do I mean by
this feels like
presumption?
insider information. I've
It
never heard this
right?
before.
So this is why it sounds scary, but we can really make this less scary. So
Okay.
unless there is some crazy fact or thing you did that just is obvious it's not reasonable, but if you follow these three things, you do these at a minimum, this is what you should do. So the first is an authorized body, so maybe your board, somebody who has authority, or a compensation committee, if your bylaws provide for that, and if your bylaws specifically give that committee the authority to make decisions.
Mhm.
A lot of bylaws create committees, which I'm a huge fan of committees, so much
Mhm.
more efficient, especially in the areas of governance and finance.
Right.
Those are two areas where if you're going to have committees, have those as standing committees. But you have to look at what power was that committee given. Because sometimes they're only given the ability to consider. They can't actually vote or enter into agreements. So when I say an authorized body, one that the bylaws say can actually allow that.
Okay.
They have to approve the compensation arrangement. Okay, so they have to vote on it following the procedures outlined in your bylaws. Members who have a conflict of interest, including the individual who's being compensated, but there may be other members, right? So each state
Like a family member, if you have a family
right.
member on the
And
board.
each state, so what you're going to want to do for this is the first place to start is looking at your state's non-stock corporation act. That's what we call it here in Connecticut, but whatever it is that you incorporated under, whatever allows you to be a nonprofit in your state. And they will usually set forth what's considered a conflict of interest. So here in Connecticut, yes, a family member, right? Or if somebody has a business interest. So it's not just that individual. So anyone with a conflict of interest cannot be involved in the process at all, not just the vote, the discussion. And I know people are like, okay, but then how do we negotiate? Like, that's fine, right? But you need to, as a board, decide this is what we're going to offer, and then have that negotiation that you might have as two separate parties in a sense, right? Like, imagine it was somebody completely unrelated and how you would make an offer and negotiate. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you come to that compensation amount, that full package, after you've reviewed and by relying on comparability data. So you need to look at what are similarly situated organizations doing and compensating. Where do you get this data? One of the best resources is if your state or if you are part of a like here, it's like an alliance for nonprofits. Every year they publish a compensation report.
Oh, yes, I have
Right?
seen
So
those.
yep. So they and by being a member, you get that. And even if you're not a member, I think like $75 to charge. Start there because it really lays out. And so we're not just talking, right? We're talking about depending on the role, what are their obligations? Somebody who is a CEO of a $50 million revenue organization is not going to have the same compensation as someone with a $400,000 budget, right?
Right.
So that's not right. So you're talking about locality, mission, budget, all those things, what they're managing for contracts. You have to look at that and use that to come up with what's reasonable. And then the last thing is the board making that decision or the committee has to document it. They have to put down their process, say their reasons, so that way you show the IRS.
Right.
This is what we did instead of saying, I think we did this, or he said, she said. So at a minimum, this is the process you need to be following, whether it's a founder, a board member getting compensated, an executive director. This is the minimum standard.
Wow, I feel like that was just a master class. I learned so much. It's got me rethinking a lot of conversations that I used to have because now, people, I feel like, unfairly, the nonprofit sector, sometimes people will say, "Oh, I can't believe that CEO is making this amount. They're supposed to do it because, they love the mission so much and all this stuff." But that means there was a real process. People really thought about it. People really put that number down and they thought about the whole package and they said, "This is reasonable." And the IRS said, "I agree." That's really big information for me. I think that's really incredible.
On the founder piece, because I see this a lot, we have an organization that goes from volunteer to paid.
Yes.
And when they're trying to figure out, they start with asking the founder, well, what do you need? What's the salary you need? It cannot be based on personal need.
Right.
That can't be a factor. So it can't be that, oh, I need, 60,000 a year minimum. No, it has to be what is reasonable. And
That makes sense, I
yeah,
think.
right.
Yeah.
So, but I do see that a lot, and the IRS has specifically said it cannot be based on the personal needs of the
Wow.
individual.
Oh, I feel you, Susie. It's infuriating that people think nonprofit leaders should not make anything.
Right.
I know. I am right with you on that.
So,
We
and
could
then
talk about that for an hour, but we will not.
this is one point that bothers me along with this is nonprofit does not mean you cannot make a profit. It just means
Totally.
how you spend it, right? And so it is a business, just like any others, and the people inside of it deserve to be compensated fairly
Yeah.
and adequately. And all too often, that's the last thing the organization thinks about, but it is. So 100% Susie, I'm off.
We
Yeah.
feel you, Susie. Wow. Okay. A lot of great stuff. All right, we have 10 minutes left. So I think we can get through one question and then maybe we could do a little bit of a wrap up. How do you feel
Yeah.
about that?
Let's touch on just looking at what we got, the one about politics. I
Okay,
think might be a good
let's do
one
it.
to end on.
Okay, here's the question. It came in from Anna. Anna said, I'd like clarity on what nonprofits can and cannot say about politics and policies. Our nonprofit helps people get health coverage, many of them undocumented immigrants. In an ideal world, our content would discuss our beliefs about protecting immigrants and the right to affordable health care, but these topics are political. Would this be seen as an endorsement of policy or a candidate? Ooh, wow, what a question.
So nonprofits can absolutely speak on public policy issues. And I call them public policy issues, not politics, because that's what they are. They're public policy issues. You can do so as long as you are not specifically like making any statements that support or oppose a candidate. So if you are simply saying, we believe that immigrants should have, healthcare and all these things, you're not saying, oh, this guy running for office says, no, we disagree. You're not doing that. You can speak on that with one more caveat. So back when we were talking about the higher standard, one of those is restrictions on lobbying. Okay.
Right.
Nonprofits can lobby. There is a limit. Now, of course, there's no specific formula or equation. They say it cannot make up a
reasonable.
Hey, it can, if you haven't, that's the wrap up in the trend. Our judicial and our statutes all say reasonable. That's a common phrase. But let's talk about what lobbying is, because you can do it. You just have to make sure you're not going over your limits, and we'll talk about that. But first, what is lobbying? So the IRS splits lobbying into two categories. The first is contacting or urging others to contact legislatures or the legislator's employees. So anybody who works for the legislator, people, right? So this is, again, that's a little caveat that I think gets a lot of people, they're not aware of, to propose, support, or oppose legislation. So you're
okay.
saying, hey, I want to see this legislation. Would you bring it? Or, hey, don't vote for this. And the biggest one that I see that a lot of organizations don't realize is urging other people to reach out, whether it be their members or the public. That is lobbying. We see that a lot. Again, doesn't mean you can't do it. We'll talk about.
Okay.
The second is advocating for the adoption or rejection of legislation. So we'll go back to our example from our question. So you are saying there is this legislation that is going to strip away, let's say, healthcare for immigrants. And you are opposed to that. As long as you're not making statements in support or opposition to the candidate, you can say, we think this should be passed, right? You can do that. You can support that legislation. So now what do you do knowing there's limits? Because the limits, like I said, it's not a bright line test. If you are doing anything that falls in those categories, whether it's through your content on social media, whether it's even through, like, you're at events, we see that a lot, right? Maybe you're registering for people for healthcare and you have that, talk to your accounting team.
Okay.
Because you need to figure out, make sure you're not exceeding the limit. Again, doesn't mean you can't do it, but there needs to be some way of keeping track what's occurring across the organization to make sure you're not exceeding that limit. And most organizations do not even come close because it's so rare, right? But still involve the accounting team, especially, like I said, now more than ever, there is going to be greater scrutiny. So have the support to be able to say, no, look, we kept track. We didn't violate that. Here's exactly everything we did. So yeah, that's.
Wow. Yes, I feel like I know a lot of organizations that have like an advocacy element, and maybe it's reminding people to vote on a certain day, or maybe it's saying, hey, remember that we're like for or against this proposition, something like that. Is that something that falls into technically lobbying?
So say that again, just to make sure I.
I'm just thinking about, so I've heard of organizations before saying like, hey, remember to vote on this day, or remember to maybe vote for or against this proposition.
So voting has its own different, that's another, because there are more exceptions because the right to vote is right. So just if that's what you're doing, there are more exceptions to say what doesn't and doesn't classify as lobbying. So again, talk to your accounting team, or there's IRS guidance on that, but that's another one of those possible exceptions. But again, it comes down to like the specifics. And so always just, the other thing too is like, even if you did something last year, always review, right? Like annual reviews, because things are changing even without new administrations and guidelines, and not just the rules they publish, but a lot of how we determine what's legal, what's not is from case law, is what the courts decide.
Mm.
And so that can then be incorporated. So always be checking. And that's why being in communication with the other teams who are also revolved around that, whether it be accounting, legal, right? Your marketing, they all have to be working together and keeping track of all that stuff.
Well, yeah, because even like when we did our first Ask Allie Anything, which was last September, I think we did it, or November, the questions are already so different, and that was only a few months ago. So yes, things are changing all the time. People have different questions. Policies are changing. Okay, we have just a couple minutes left. So I would just like to ask you as a blanket statement, is there any one thing that we didn't cover today that you are like, I wish I got to say this? I would love to share like one last tidbit.
I mean, I think my overall message, and this is whether it's related, is taking a deep breath. So I have found myself caught up in all of this because there is so much uncertainty.
Mhm.
But I think I take it for granted because I deal with the law on a daily basis. And this is what I said. The law is full of uncertainty normally. We're just seeing it more. So I know it's hard when I say things like, we have to wait and see, we have to let this process play through. But this is a natural part of the legal system. And so I just want to say that to provide reassurance to people that says that. And then the other piece too is, and we had a question come in about like boards and things like that, and I mentioned it earlier, is now more than ever we do see a lot boards that aren't as active. You need to be making sure your board is involved and aware, especially right now. So I really encourage people to do that and bring in, you know, board members who maybe haven't been as active. And it's okay if now you're going to say, look, our expectations have changed. We have, attendance requirements, but make sure you're involving the board in all of these discussions.
Right, because they're going to want to know, and they're especially going to want to know if, something happens on the bad side of things,
Right.
something unfortunately.
And something that I see is all too often, board members are picked for their pockets and their financial ability, but I want to say efficient board should have people of different backgrounds who can
Mhm.
help you navigate these things, right?
Right.
So do you have an accounting person on there, especially if you're a small organization who maybe doesn't have, so really utilize those resources.
Right.
Like I'm on two boards, and so I use, I'm not the best fundraiser, but when it's legal stuff, right? So
Well, I can help you with that.
right, well, that's the thing. I surround myself with people who do that. But it's also a good time to look at your board composition. Is there areas where you
Right.
could fill in for these things that you don't have that knowledge or skill set on the employee side or contractor side? Look at that right now. It's a really good time to reassess your board composition.
Well, I think my job today was to speak for everybody, to be the voice of the people who registered, and of course, be the voice of the people in the chat today. So I'm going to go ahead and speak for everybody again and say thank you so much. Thank you for all this information. I learned so much. I say that every time I talk to you, but I truly mean it. And, show some love in the chat if you're still hanging out and listening with us. This has just been incredible. You'll all get a copy of the recording afterwards. And, we'll do another one. We'll get another one set up here coming soon. I'm sure we can work something out. And of course, I do just want to remind everybody, of course, if you are interested, we talked a lot about the legal things related to nonprofits, but of course, if you are interested in consent and things that we didn't actually touch on consent today, so that's kind of interesting. That's usually the number one thing we talk about.
We did, but you know what? When we decided to do this and we said, what's the topic going to be? I think we both said
We did.
We cannot pick it because there's going to be so much going on. One, we need to wait, but also there's just so much going on that it was so hard to say. How do we narrow it down?
Yes,
So, yeah.
we did say that. We said we thought I being in the storytelling community, I thought, I have a lot of questions about consent and how that works legally, but you're exactly right. I think we answered all the questions that a good amount of questions that are really representative of what people are wondering right now. But yeah, if you are interested in learning about memory fox or ethical storytelling, I do again want to invite you all to join March Madness. We are doing this just really cool promo where we're looking for 64 nonprofits. I only have 11 slots left. we had 11 slots at the top of the hour. I haven't checked. Maybe a couple of you already signed up, so maybe it's already a little lower, but yeah, I'd love for you to join. We're going to do a really fun content. It's going to be a great competition, and 4 people out of 64 will win a free account. So that means you have a 1 in 16 chance to become a Memory Fox storyteller, which means you can collect, organize, and share impact stories all year long. So that's my final plug for that. But thank you so much. You'll all get your recording. Allie, we'll see you again soon.
Yeah. So definitely, and I'll say, I know we couldn't get to everything. I do post a lot on LinkedIn, so if you're not following me, because I do share little things, and it's a great way to ask more questions.
Oh, yes, and I'll make sure I have all the links that we talked about today in our follow-up email, as well as your LinkedIn, so people can easily connect with you.
All right.
Okay, enjoy the rest of your week. Bye, everybody.